Congressman Peter King's from New York, and he's done many investigations, even before Donald Trump was around, on Muslim Americans. He was as McCarthy as it gets before the advent of Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And he had congressional hearings. I mean, what about these Muslims? My country has a problem. It is the Muslims. He was the originator of kind of that song. I'm paraphrasing. Now, but the investigations were deadly serious. We got to look into these Muslim guys because they're trouble. Now, he's never let go of that. So he's back now that others have joined his bandwagon. And here's what he had to say.
And we can say that 98, 99% of the Muslims in this country are good people. I'm actually swearing in the first elected Muslim on Long Island to office. She's a good friend of mine. So this is nothing against Muslims. But the fact is, that is where the threat is coming from.
Now, Peter King would know a thing or two about threats because he was sanctioned by a judge before for supporting the IRA, a bunch of terrorists. Now, there are a lot of Irish people who sympathize with the cause of the IRA, if not their tactics, but you didn't help them by funneling money to them so they could buy weapons so they can kill people. Those were some of the charges against Peter King, with well-known ties to actual terrorists. This is a guy who has the gall to say, oh, the threat is coming from Muslims. By the way, on that, he's wrong. Is there no threat from Muslims in this country in terms of Muslim radicals and jihadists? No, of course there are. Look at what happened in San Bernardino. And obviously, 9/11 was horrific and catastrophic. Now, that was about 13 years ago. So I get that that is obviously a monumentally important event where nearly 3,000 Americans died. Now, if you're talking about the last 13 and a half years, though, the jury's in on that. We have facts on that. Islam-inspired terror attacks accounted for 50 fatalities over the past 13 and a half years, according to Professor Charles Kruzman and Duke Professor David Shanzer. Meanwhile, right-wing extremists averaged 337 attacks per year in the decade after 9/11, causing a total of 254 fatalities. So not only were there far more right-wing attacks, right-wing terrorist attacks here in this country than Muslim terrorist attacks, they were more deadly. They killed 5 times more people than Muslim terrorism in the last 13 years. Again, 9/11 is gigantic. We get that. The concerns around it are perfectly legitimate. We've already accidentally invaded several countries over that, some of which we should not have invaded. So, but if you're talking about the continuing threat in America, in the last 13 years, it is absolutely clear where that is coming from. It's coming from the right wing. So if you want to investigate people that are causing the threat, well, under Peter King's logic, I'm sorry, man. I mean, you talk about going into mosques. I think we got to go into right-wing gathering spots. Wherever the right wing gathers, that's where the threat's coming from. I got good right-wing friends. Some of my best friends are right-wing. You know, I got no problem. Some right-wingers are lovely. But according to Peter King's logic, we got to look into all of them. So if you gather in your churches, we got to look at your churches. You gather in political groups, Tea Party groups, Republican caucuses, I got to look into it because you're 5 times the threat that Muslims are in this country. Those are facts. You don't like facts, you can cry about it. In fact, that's exactly what Peter King suggests.
I can hear the cries of civil libertarians and constitutionalists right now, Congressman.
Yeah, listen, they can cry all they want. The fact is, that's where the threat is coming from.
Oh, really? They can cry all they want. Hey, Peter King, I'm sorry, man. Every time you have a Republican Party gathering, I got to look into it. I got to spy in on it. Oh, are you crying? Are you crying? Well, you're 5 times the threat that Muslims are in this country. I'm sorry, man. That's where the threat's coming from. I didn't say it, you said it. So wherever the right wing gathers, let's make sure we spy in on those guys. They are incredibly dangerous. Now, the reality is all these attacks have been horrible. In total, about 300 people killed in 13 years. Perhaps we shouldn't overreact to the right wing or Muslim extremists, that perhaps we should be Americans and actually keep our civil liberties. And fighting for our civil liberties and our rights and our freedoms is not crying. That's called being an American. Peter King, you should look into that when you're not busy looking into helping your terrorist friends. Young Turks.